This episode of the Duke Basketball Report podcast is brought to you by Byrd Campbell, PA, with offices in Florida and Texas, founded by two Duke grads. Byrd Campbell means business. Hey there, Duke fans, and this is episode 94 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. We are coming to you on Wednesday, November 15th. It is the day after Duke outlast Michigan State in Chicago, 88-81. We will get into all that and recap that game, and we have a special treat for you tonight. But first, let me bring in my partners in crime. First off, in Atlanta, the man, Jason Evans. Jason, what's going on?
Let me tell you something. What's going on is that was a really, really fun game to watch if you're a Duke fan, and we're going to talk about why. But man, it's so impressive that we won that game.
Absolutely, it was a great game. One of the classics in that Champions Classic. Really, that's really what the game was all about. And also in Denver, we have Sam Klein. Sam, what's going on?
So I was at the game last night, and let me tell you, if you haven't been to a Champions Classic and can figure out how to do so, get yourself to one of those events because it is the whole thing was just top notch.
Absolutely. You know what? Let's start with that. Let's start with you, Sam. Let's bring everybody up to speed. Duke, Michigan State, number 1 versus number 2 at the United Center in Chicago, part of the Champions Classic. And in a back and forth most of the game, we had a couple of runs, we had a couple of lulls. But in the end, 88-81 is the final. Duke outlast Michigan State. Since, Sam, you were there, why don't we start with you? Give us, first of all, let's talk about how it was like there, and give me what your thoughts on the game were.
So, yeah, the atmosphere at the event was really fantastic. There were, I wouldn't say that any of the teams was like dominating as far as the fan bases go. There were certainly, like, during the Duke was playing in the first game, and the Kentucky section and the Kansas section were more empty, but the stadium filled in like towards the end of the Duke game, and I stayed for the Kansas Kentucky game, which was also a total blast. The United Center is obviously an excellent place to see basketball. They've had a number of good basketball players come through there, so that was pretty cool. And as far as our game goes, I think you have to start with Grayson Allen and just what a show he put on, making threes and just being all over the place. I think that we saw a little bit of him saying, like, this is my team, especially after Bagley went down. This is my team, and I'm ready to kind of take the reins here. So he got 37 points on 20 shots, and it never felt like he was out of rhythm. He was kind of doing everything on offense. As far as the defense goes, the really interesting thing was how much I think that this Duke team played zone, and I think it did frustrate Michigan State, even though they beat it a number of times. I'm curious to see how much they stick with that. I think that this Michigan State team was particularly vulnerable to it. They run a lot of offense like through the middle of the court as opposed to around the perimeter. And the most impressive thing, I think, was that it never felt like Miles Bridges was really getting the offensive touches that he wanted. Now, he ended up with 19 points, but I don't think we saw kind of the best version of Miles Bridges last night. I was most impressed, honestly, with Nick Ward, their big guy. And then kind of my last guy who is, really worth giving a shout out for Duke is Trevon Duval, who was kind of all over the place. He got a whole bunch of steals. He made some really impressive transition dunks and passes, and he was kind of leading everybody around in transition. I think that when Bagley went out, I think like 10 minutes into the game, and Duke went and played actually a lot of small lineup, which I'm sure you guys want to talk about as well. And when we've previewed this team and talked about the games prior to this, we were saying, oh, Duke's gonna, play so many minutes of every game with like 3 bigs on the floor if you count DeLaurier as a big, and like Jordan Goldwire might get some minutes here and there, but for the most part, it's just the three guards of Allen, Duval, and Trent who are going to play. And it felt like we saw like most of the scholarship players last night, including Antonio Frankovic. We saw Alex O'Connell there for a few minutes. And I think that the only disappointment kind of from the bench was Marquise Bolden. I'm really just not sure where his development is. He looks slow and a little bit lost, honestly.
Strep throat. Dude, he still has strep throat. I mean,
still? Come on. Isn't he over it yet?
He was supposed to be out for a couple weeks and he came back early. I wouldn't hold it. Let's wait a little bit before we make passing final judgment on Marquise.
All right, we can do that. That's fair.
It's
you're
still
right.
early.
You're right. But other than that, I thought that everybody and you guys can tell me if you felt the same way watching it on TV. I thought that everybody who came in looked like they belonged for Duke, even the guys who were like lower in the rotation, and that was really. It was really reassuring, and it's certainly not something that I expected because I think that even more so than the two of you, I was really bullish on the starting five being like the only guys who are going to get lots and lots of minutes, and then other people are going to fill in around them.
So, Jason, before I kick it to you, I want to pose this question to you. You know, on the last podcast episode, we talked a lot about the team, you know, Michigan State being a physical team and being a great rebounding team. We had 46 rebounds, and the real shocking stat for me is that 25 of them were offensive. That is a huge number considering, you know, one of our main big guys, Marvin Bagley, was out for 3/4 of the game. When you're talking about this, rate the performance of the team in terms of rebounding. Is that one of the best rebounding games you've ever seen a Duke team?
So the incredible thing, yes, it is. It is a great rebounding performance against a team that should be and is a really good rebounding team. The truly impressive stat. So we had 25 offensive rebounds, like you said. They only had 23 defensive rebounds. So it doesn't take a math genius to tell you that when we shot the ball and missed it, there was a better chance of us getting it than they got it. That's huge. That's unbelievable. And I'll give you another piece of that. We also missed 10 free throws, and they got all the free throw rebounds. Maybe I missed one, but I don't recall us a free throw rebound. So, I mean, the rebounding disparity when we took an actual shot when the game was being played was even greater. This is such a good rebounding team, this Duke team. And we haven't even mentioned Marvin Bagley got injured, only played 10 minutes of this game. For Duke to have played the number 2 team in the nation, to have beaten them by 7 in a game that we led the whole way. I mean, we didn't lead by a lot. It was, you know, pretty close, but Duke pretty much led the whole way. And Marvin Bagley, who's been our best player thus far, granted, Grayson Allen looks like he's our best player overall, but Bagley certainly right up there with them. I mean, Bagley looks like a first or second team All-American. We're missing a first or second team All-American for 30 minutes of the 40 minutes of that game, and we still won. It begs the question, is this Duke team going to lose? And, you know, I don't want to get into that kind of craziness yet, but wow, I mean, a tremendously impressive performance. Couple things I want to focus in on. You talked about Grayson Allen and how great he was. 100% agree. Grayson was the player of the game. He lifted us onto his shoulders, and he was absolutely fabulous. But we don't get there without Trevon Duval. Duval had 10 assists, 3 turnovers, which is a lot for him. Oh my gosh, only a 3-to-1 assist to turnover ratio. But I mean, you know, some great assists. He had 6 steals. And one of the stats, you guys may recall this, I've spoken about this stat over the years many times. One of the stats I always look at is field goal attempts. Duke had 76 field goal attempts. Michigan State only had 61. You get 15 more field goal attempts than the opposition, you're going to win the game. And so even though Michigan State hit more than 50% of their shots and Duke hit less than 40% of our shots, we won that game because we had so many more shots. And that's a function of turnovers, offensive rebounds, the steals that Trevon Duval got. I thought Duval was great taking the ball to the hole. At one point in the second half, he had a move where he split 2 guys and then switched hands and put the layup in. And I was like, that's an NBA. That is a big time NBA move. That's a Kyrie Irving kind of move.
Did it?
I thought.
Did
go ahead.
It look like? I mean, when I think I remember the one you're talking about. He had a couple good moves in transition, but there was one where he went up for the dunk in transition. And when he got airborne, my thought was, wait a minute, he's not about to dunk that, is he? Because he's definitely not close enough to the rim to do it. And it was like effortless.
No, the one I'm talking about, he had the ball on the wing, and he was driving toward the basket, and two guys came to block his path, and he like switched hands and went between them, and then switched hands back and laid the ball in.
I do remember that one.
It wasn't a transition thing. It was he was just running the offense at that point.
Yeah. So
that on the wing.
That was an ugly play, and by ugly I mean when I saw that, my face contorted, and I was like, "Damn!" It was one of those kind of plays. It made me look ugly looking at it. Duval was absolutely incredible. And I also want to talk about Wendell Carter Jr., who I thought really struggled early on. Michigan State is long and physical, as we talked about. Jaren Jackson Jr., who, by the way, is going to be easily a top 10 pick in the NBA draft. That kid has crazy potential. This guy has 7'5" wingspan. And he and Miles Bridges and Nick Ward were all protecting the rim. And I thought they really bothered Carter at first, but I think Carter found a way to adjust to it later in the game and became more and more effective as the game went on. And I think that's a really great sign for what he's going to do later on in the year and throughout the season. The more experience he gets, look, I mean, this is a guy who hasn't played against guys his size. Here he was playing against three of the best big men in the country in Ward, Jackson, and Bridges. And he got 12 rebounds, 5 offensive rebounds. His field goal percentage wasn't great, but he drew fouls and went to the line and hit his free throws for the most part. I thought, he was really good. And then the last thing I want to talk about is, Sam, you spoke a little bit about the bench. Javin DeLaurier played 24 minutes. Now, granted, I think his minutes were boosted by Bagley not being available. But DeLaurier had another one of those games where his stat line, you just look at it, you go, 7 rebounds, 3 of them offensive, 4 assists, 3 steals, 2 block shots. DeLaurier impacts the game when he's in there. It seems like there are 3 of him when he's in the game at all times. And the progress that kid has made from a year ago, to merely say it's night and day doesn't do it any justice.
He'll have games where I'm sure this year he'll have a game where he does have to play that many minutes like he did the other night, and will end up getting huge stats like all over the place, getting a double-double, and like opposing fans will watch that game and be like, who even is that guy? Like he's not one of the starters. He's not one of the most heralded recruits, but man, he just comes in there and like you said, he can do everything.
So the last thing I want to say is, after watching 3 games, I think it's really important that we talk about something that I think is unbelievable, that is making this season, for me, the most exciting season in several years.
Trevon Duval averaging a double-double.
No, although that's great. No,
that's cool.
For 37 years, Coach K has played the game a certain way. Coach K, for 37 years, has played man-to-man defense with very little zone or no zone. Coach K, for many years, has embraced the value of the three-point shot to the detriment of bringing the ball inside, of pounding the ball into the post. He's recognized that 3 is worth more than 2. And Coach K has generally sacrificed rebounding to get steals and turnovers. That's the way. Do you guys disagree? Am I correct about that? That has been
absolutely correct.
Frustrating the passing lanes is the most important thing about the sort of standard Coach K defense.
For 37 years, that is the way Coach K has played the game. And here in year 38, he's doing the exact opposite in all those ways. We're playing nothing but zone. We're pounding the ball inside instead of taking 3-pointers. Not that we don't take 3-pointers when you give them to us, but our first look is into the post. And we are a great rebounding team. Now, the nice thing is, Coach K has learned that zone, with the length we have, we still get the steals and the turnovers, but we are a team that focuses on reboundings. How fun is it to watch this man, the GOAT, the greatest of all time, adapt in this kind of way? As great as K is, I think he's largely been unwilling to adapt in the past, and this season, he's proving that even an old dog can learn new tricks.
That's very well said, Jason. I agree with you on a lot of it. There's a couple of things that I want to point out in kind of going back to some of the things that you guys mentioned. I want to talk about, we said in the last podcast, and I said that the demoralizer for Sparty is when you play their game and kind of beat them at it, or play them to a level, match their intensity, being physical and pounding the paint and getting rebounds and doing all these things on the inside. Let me give you some stats. Points in the paint, we had 36 points to their 42. That's pretty much a wash for that game. Second chance points, 17 to 11. So we had more second chance points. We obviously had more offensive rebounds than they had defensive rebounds, which means we got that many more opportunities to put the ball in the basket. And points off turnovers, 19 to 9. We outscored them 19 to 9. So those things lead me to mean that we really honed in on what they do well and neutralized it. If we're level on the physicality parts, aspects of the game against Michigan State, you're winning that ball game, because we shot better than them from the outside. And I think those kind of things, it seems that we honed in on that and we neutralized it, and that's why we emerged the victors in this game. One thing I'll also note, and I think you guys alluded to it a little bit, but I want to highlight it. Grayson played 40 minutes. He was everywhere. He was the leader for this game, and it's clear that when it comes to big games, the big players need to step up, and he did that, especially in the absence of Marvin Bagley. He knew he had to pick up his game, and he elevated to a level that we've never seen him play before. But what I love about this team so far, and last night was really the highlight of this, these guys are poised. There was not a point in this game where I thought they were playing out of whack, where they were panicking, where when Michigan State would go on a run, we would just give them a run right back. If there was a momentum that Michigan State had, we would stop it and create some of our own. These freshmen are playing with real poise, unlike anything I've seen early in the year. Now we've seen some young teams grow into that role, but to start off against the number 2 team in the country, neutralize them at their best part of their game, and play with the poise of veterans. That's what this team needs. We saw that last night, and I think that is why I'm so happy about this win.
Donald, I know Sam did not see this. Did you see Grayson's post-game interview?
I did, yeah. Go ahead, tell the folks about it.
Oh no, I got to watch it. I watched it this morning, but yeah, talk about it because it was good.
So the major thing in that interview, and it dovetails off of a lot of people on the board. I hope you guys have gotten a chance to read the article in the Players Tribune about Grayson Allen and how what Grayson Allen was as a freshman at Duke. It's not an article. It's penned by Grayson. It's autobiographical. He talks about what he was as a freshman at Duke, that he was quiet and he was afraid to speak up. And I think he said during the start of his sophomore year, he took a public speaking class, and it brought him out of his shell. But what he largely talked about there, and what he also talked about in this post-game interview, was when he was a freshman, Quinn Cook was the leader. Quinn Cook was the senior on that team, and he said Quinn brought him out, and Quinn was constantly bringing Grayson out of his shell and showing Grayson what it meant to be a leader. And so in this post-game interview, Grayson talked about Trevon Duval. He talked about it. First of all, he credited Duval for getting him the ball in the right place, and that what a great kid Grayson is. He's got a 37-point game. He's just become the leader nationally for Player of the Year. And they talked to him, and the very first words of his mouth are, he's like, "Hey, Trevon Duval did a great job of getting me the ball where I could score." But I think when you put the post-game interview and the article together, you get that Grayson Allen is really embracing the senior leader role. And he says, "I want to be this team's Quinn Cook." Quinn Cook was his example of what a great senior leader is, who leads you to a national title. And Grayson's saying, "I want to be that same thing for these guys." It's so, and it shows you the importance of that, of having a senior, and how close we came to maybe not having one on this year's team. But, Grayson's there and he's doing it. And I think he's teaching these guys what it takes and what it means to be a Duke ball player.
And he's having fun doing it. Like, you can see on his face, like after that game, he had a lot of fun out there in the court. And that's what you want to see from, as much as people have vilified him over the last couple of years. What makes me the most happy is to see him having fun out there again. And you saw it's the freshman Grayson where he's going out and he's playing his game, and he's this time he's bringing his team along with him, and that's what's going to get us to the top. It's fun. It's fun to watch him play, and it's honestly the best thing to see him so happy out there. That's what's really making this team work so far. This episode of the Duke Basketball Report podcast is brought to you by Byrd Campbell, PA, and we have a special quote this week from Tucker Byrd, one of the founders of Byrd Campbell, and it's about the Michigan State game last night. He says, "You got to love the way Grayson carries himself with all the dignity and aplomb of the former Duke greats, who were subjected to the same jeering from opposing fans. He didn't wilt, he fed off of it. Even his crouching tiger pose after nailing that late three-point dagger at the top of the key over an outstretched defender had an elegance to it. Thank you, Byrd Campbell, for your continued support of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. And if you guys need any legal advice and you are in Florida or Texas, hit them up at birdcampbell.com.
Crouching tiger. I love that. That is awesome.
And okay, now that we're done with a little basketball, we have a little treat for you. I told you at the beginning of the podcast that we have a special treat for you, and I'm going to kick it to Jason, who's going to introduce it. Go ahead, Jason.
So, guys, we have interviewed a lot of people on this podcast. We've been very fortunate to have many former Duke basketball players. We've had national sports journalists and the such. We've interviewed a lot of really interesting people over the course of time, and it's been a great pleasure to do that. I think, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to be very surprised when I tell you who we're about to interview. But the big surprise is I'm telling you, you're about to hear what I think is the best interview we've ever had on the DBR podcast. It's incredibly revealing. It's incredibly smart. It's from a guy who really knows basketball. And that guy is Chris Burgess. Now, some of you are probably saying, wait a second, Chris Burgess, he hasn't been associated with Duke for a long. He left Duke. For folks who don't know the name that well, Chris Burgess was a highly touted recruit in 1997. He played for Duke for 2 years, the 97-98 and 98-99 teams. He then transferred to Utah. And, a guy who leaves the program, he left the program at a time when Elton Brand was leaving, and Chris Burgess probably could have taken over as the new center, the main big man for Duke. I mean, it wasn't for a lack of playing time that he was leaving, but he wanted to go home to Utah. And we didn't really get into why he left Duke in this interview. But Chris Burgess also happens to be, if you listen to the podcast, you know this. Sam brought it up a couple weeks ago. Chris Burgess is, after years of playing professional basketball, mostly in Europe and overseas, Chris is now an assistant coach on Utah Valley, the very same Utah Valley team that we played just a few days ago, and the same Utah Valley team that played Kentucky on Friday and then Duke on Saturday. So after Utah Valley did that, a DBR classic, a guy who has been around the DBR forever. He's not very active anymore, but you may remember the name from the old days of Biff Man. Biff Man wrote to me. He's a fan of the podcast, and he said, "Dude, Jason, you guys should interview Chris Burgess and ask him about playing Kentucky and Duke back to back." And I went, "Oh my God, that's a brilliant idea." So full credit to Biff Man for the idea to contact Chris Burgess. I reached out to him. He said he'd love to do it. And just this morning, or just this afternoon, I should say, we spoke to Chris Burgess. Folks, again, I'm telling you, this is going to be one of the best interviews you're going to hear on the DBR podcast. I toss it now. Donald and I were very fortunate. We got a chance to chat with former Blue Devil and current Utah Valley assistant head coach, Chris Burgess. So, Chris Burgess, thanks so much for joining us. We are honored to have a former Dukie in the house for the DBR podcast. You are an assistant coach at Utah Valley, and you guys played Duke just a couple days ago. Give me your assessment of the Duke team that you guys just played. What were the things that surprised you about them? What's your scouting report about the team?
So when we scheduled that game, as assistant coaches, we kind of break up the scout games, and I was like, hey, I'm taking Duke. Obviously, he played there and wanted a shot at really, because you can learn so much as you scout this team, right? And so I was able to kind of watch the blue-white game and then watch the two exhibitions versus Bowie and I think it was North Missouri State. And the one thing that stuck out of me is I'm like, Grayson Allen's like back to his old self. That was my first take, was like, that's the Grayson from sophomore year into freshman year. And so I was like, okay, what else do they have? And then watching Byrd of Byrd Campbell, I was like, this is the best second jump kid I've ever seen in my life. He kind of throws it up there, shoots a good shot, and has such a soft touch. His second jump is better than his first jump, how he attacks the glass. And then I thought Wendell Carter is the most skilled big man in the country. I had never seen a guy who can go both shoulders with such ease, and he catches the ball in the post with such patience. It's like he's done it 1,000 times in college basketball. It kind of just blew me away with his skill around the rim. And then he'll kind of step out every once in a while and bang a three. And then I was just like, Gary Trent is the perfect complement to Grayson on running that other wing. He just has a man's body, man's shoulders. He reminds me of his dad in terms of his body. And then he was lights out in those two exhibition games and then in the scrimmage. And then Trevon Duval does everything you want in terms of getting in the key and kicking out, getting in the key and kicking out. And if you want him to finish, you finish. So my first thought was, man, this is going to be really hard. This is going to be really hard. Their bigs really run. We knew that. So when I'm thinking about defensive transition, I'm like, Coach, maybe we just send one guy to the glass and we just get back in transition with four guys and build a wall, find Grayson, find Gary, and let's make Trevon Duval kind of go one-on-one and score on us, right? Let's not let him kick out to the shooters and kick to the bigs when they're running the play. Let's make Trevon beat us. Well, he had 15 points, 12 assists, so that didn't really work against us. In the post, I felt pretty good about our five-man guarding Wendell because we have a 7-foot Oklahoma transfer who had 17 and 12 in our game against Duke. I was really worried about the 4 spot with Marvin and that's what makes Duke so dangerous, was because, our 4-man's 6'5", right? And I was like, Coach, we're going to have to double the post. We're going to do that. And this is a Duke team, and I know they're at home, and I know the Camera Crazies, and that's like a 20-point advantage right there. And it was Coach K's potential 1,000th win. I knew they were going to allow that stuff. You can't prepare for. Our guys just got to be tough. But at the end of the day, our guys battled. Duke's just that good, and they showed it last night. Obviously, beating Michigan State.
Yeah, that was awesome, man. That was a really compelling. So, I know you haven't looked at the whole country the way you've looked at Duke, but do you think these guys, do they deserve the number one ranking that they have?
Yeah. Now, I've watched Arizona, and I think they're good. I think Duke's the best. And I say that because I think they have these talented freshmen who can score in so many ways. I think they're the biggest front court in terms of like skill, athletic ability, length, and rebounding the ball and then scoring the post. And I just think they have that senior Grayson he's just his old self. You know what I mean? And I know there's all this, the tripping incidents and all this stupid stuff that doesn't matter, but for some reason it affected him a little bit last year. But I just think he's back. So you got these stud freshmen around him, and then Grayson's like, hey, this is my year. I'm player of the year. And it makes them, in my eyes right now, the clear favorite for the ACC, the clear favorite for the national champion. But I think maybe they drop a gamer here right on the road because the freshman learning experience. I think Coach K talked about it in the pregame yesterday. These guys got to grow up with point, but the only way to do that is these games, right? These games on the road, these games in neutral sites, these games in front of away from Cameron. And they'll do that. And then once the tournament, starts, there's no one better in the game right now than Coach K in terms of getting his team ready and focusing on the game at hand. And I think that's where this Duke team is going to be really special. I'm rooting for them because, I'm rooting for Kentucky and Duke, and I'm not a Kentucky fan, but I'm rooting for them because our guys battled against those two guys, and we went toe-for-toe with Kentucky for 40 minutes, and then we went toe-for-toe with Duke for about 8.
Well, you brought me exactly to the next question on my list, which was, you guys did the truly insane thing of playing Kentucky on Friday night and Duke on Saturday night to open the season. Have you lost your mind? Take us fans inside what it was like to play Kentucky and Duke back to back.
Well, it's looking back, it's like, what are we doing? That's honestly, but like coaches always want to play Kentucky. This was going to our third off season where we're getting ready for scheduling, right? And coaches always want to go back. I get it, right? He won a national championship. That's his alma mater. He wanted to take his family back there. He wanted his guys, his players to experience it and to take a shot at Kentucky in Rupp. And then all of a sudden we had that game kind of lined up, and then out comes Duke looking for a game with us. And so I got excited right away, right? But I was just like, this is going to be really hard, Kentucky and Duke. And then all of a sudden Duke's like, hey, this is the only day we can play it. And so we're meeting at a staff, and we're just like, guys, that's 24 hours against potentially two top 5 teams. And this was before Bagley even signs. It's going to be, it's going to be really hard. How are our guys going to do it? Let's think about this. And then the more we thought about it, we're just like, Duke and Kentucky are really good. We know that. If we have 5 days rest or a month rest or 24-hour rest, it's going to be really hard. Let's just go do it. Let's go challenge this team. It'll be a great motivator in the off season as these guys, have their summer workouts, their fall workouts. It's something they can think about as they go to bed every night. Hey, I got Duke and Kentucky. Did I work out enough today? Did I get enough shots today? Did I watch enough film with Coach today?
Well, it put you guys on the map a little bit. I mean, nationally, people
Absolutely
paid more attention to you. Yeah.
Yeah, in June they're talking about Utah Valley basketball, which is great, right? And before June they were like, who's Utah Valley? Who's the WAC? Who's this player? Who's like Coach Pope is the head coach? You know what I mean? Like Mark Pope is
right.
the head coach. So
yeah.
they put us on the map. So we used it for recruiting. You can imagine, right? Every single day. Hey, even when we're trying to sign guys for this season, right? You can go here and play, Sisters of the Poor first 2 games, or you can come here and challenge yourself right off the bat against the best of the best. So, and then even after, ESPN followed us around with the cameras, RKS, our local Utah, they followed us. So everyone, even with University of Utah in the Pac-12 in our state, even with BYU and the WCC, everyone was talking about Utah Valley for opening college basketball. And even though we lost, man, I'm telling you, it was, like you said, it was so cool and a great experience. And then we went on the road for the 3rd game of 5 days last night. And, and we were up 19 at some point because our guys at Idaho State, and we're better than them, but our guys are like, hey, this is nothing. We were just in Cameron and Rupp. We're in Pocatello, Idaho. This is easy, right? And that's what we want our guys to feel when we get to conference.
We want to go back to your time at Duke. You played at Duke from 1997 to 1999. Take us back to that point. What were your favorite memories of your time in Durham?
Oh, man. Whew. So many. Probably Midnight Madness, my freshman year. Dickie V's there, and they're introducing us at half court. And if you guys remember, it was like Avery. Alphabetically, it was like Avery, Brand. No, it was Avery, Patty, Brand, Burgess, right? The 4 freshmen. And that was like you're sitting at half court, and the crazy, everything you dreamed of, right? Everything you watched on TV, ESPN, and on my visit, right? I went to 2 different games, unofficially and officially. And you're just standing there half court. It's like this is surreal. Like I'm part of this program, part of this brotherhood. Obviously the Final Four, Jimmy V Classic, playing these unbelievable historic games, Michigan State against all these big time players, and Mo Peterson, Matique Cleaves, and going to Maryland with Steve Francis and smacking them by 30 as they're the number 3 team in the country, right? And so, celebrating with coaches in the locker room, celebrating with your team. There's just so many. I didn't lose very much. In my 2 years, I was 31-1 in the ACC, and my, only lost, I think, 6 total games in 2 years. And that's because we were really talented and we were really good. But I learned so much there. Played with some of the best teammates. Quinn Snyder is an assistant coach who recruited me. He's now here with the Utah Jazz, the head coach. So that Duke circle was just, man, Coach Krzyzewski's coaching tree is just amazing. As a coach now, I try to think back of all the things I try to learn, all the feelings I had from my assistant coach, the way it made me feel. So many memories, all positive. They really are. And I know I left at the end of the day, but they were all positive feelings at Duke.
Yeah, you mentioned, a lot of those guys that were on that 98, 99 team,
Yeah.
We think that team was one of the best ever. Like, do you stop and honestly, do you stop and think, man, if we just won that game against UConn?
Yeah. I mean, every day. I've yet to watch that game. And credit Coach Calhoun and UConn for their scout against us. But to this day, and I have friends that are friends or family that remember that team, and they watch teams that win national championships this year. And there's no one can compete with that Duke team. We were that good. And I was like I said, Maryland, number 3 team in the country. We punched them by 30 at their place. North Carolina at the Dean Dome punched them by 20 something. No one stood a contest. But UConn, hey, it's single elimination, and they did. Rip Hamilton was unbelievable. We just had a hard time with Ricky Moore to start the game, and they did a great job on Elton. And Trajan was obviously making every shot and doing everything he could as a senior leader. He didn't have enough help from guys that usually, everyone was kind of under their average, you could say, except for Trage. It was, Elton was under his average. Shane, didn't have his best game. Carrawell was struggling a little bit, and that's what the tournament does to you. That's what the Final Four does to you. Who steps up, right? And UConn did.
God, I mean, I have to tell you, I watched that game, and I'm still. I know you haven't been able to watch it again. I'm still so frustrated.
No.
I really think that's that team goes down. It's one of the top 2 or 3 teams to not win a national title ever. It's
absolutely. We were loaded. And we had the best player in the country, the best shooter in the country, best defensive player in the country. I mean, we had everything. We just, you know what? We just lost.
Yep. That's why the one and done tournament is so special. Hey, I want to ask you I want to ask you really quick. You were part of. You mentioned the class. I refer to it as the 3 Bs and an A.
That's right.
You and Shane Battier and Elton Brand and William Avery and one of the I mentioned this on our podcast just a couple of weeks ago. You and Battier and Brand, at one point, all 3 of you were ranked as the number 1 player in your class. I mean, it was a truly remarkable recruiting class. To some extent, people at the time, said it may have been, up there with the Fab Five as the greatest recruiting class of all time. Yeah. We've seen things change a bit since then. But
it's crazy. It's crazy since then.
But talk just a little bit about what it was like to be part of a huge, highly touted recruiting class like that, and the hype around being recruited, and you see some of it today, how it's different today.
Yeah, that was a special class. Starting with Shane, I think he was the first to kind of jump on and commit, and then he started working on all of us. I was really being heavily recruited by obviously BYU and UCLA, Kansas, and Kentucky. And I always wanted to go to Duke. I've been a Duke fan since like the Danny Ferry days, Bobby, Christian. So I'd always wanted to go to Duke. But you kind of have to, as you're getting recruited, you're trying to put all those feelings aside and find the best fit, right? And find what makes sense and make sure you do your homework with recruiting visits and getting to know the coach, building relationships. So Shane was kind of the first to jump on. And then Elton came on, and then it was start thinking, okay, man, we can really compete for 4 years. We got a really good team. And then all of a sudden Will jumped on, and then I was like, okay, well, there's our point combo guard. And my AAU point guard, some people don't know, but my AAU point guard growing up was Barron Davis. And so I'd always wanted to play with Barron. We had always talked about going to the same school. And so I was hopeful he would kind of go to Duke. So I was trying to convince him to be like, no, William's a 2, you play the 1. Let's do this Fab 5 thing, right? We'll both go together. So it'll be Barron, Will, Shane, me, and Elt. And so Barron was like, I'm not leaving LA. So that was really, really hard. So it was hard for me to, at the time, to kind of jump on board because I wanted to play with Barron so bad. But then that huge scandal with UCLA, Coach Herrick went down with if you guys remember that, with Barron's driving around a car and Coach Herrick's name or something like that. So
right. I remember the scandal. Yeah.
Yeah. So I immediately just told Coach Herrick, hey, I'm out. I don't want any investigation. I don't need any of that stuff. So then it came down to BYU and Duke, and it was a no-brainer for me. It was an absolute no-brainer for me. I wanted to win. I wanted to play with the best, play against the best, play in the best conference. And so it was a no-brainer to me. And so I jumped on last, and so we kind of got there, and it was great. We had this great chemistry, and it was like everyone was kind of happy for each other. Everyone wanted to be a part of something, right? And I think that's a huge testament to Coach K and how you check your ego at the door. You check it at the door, he'll make you, right? And that's the culture he's built there, and you knew that from day one. You were not, I don't care how big of a recruit you were or how big of a player you were not bigger than him or his program, right? And I think that's what makes him one of the thousands of reasons what makes him so successful and so good. So that was fun. It was fun. It was, the notoriety, the magazines. This is before social media, and everyone was talking about it. So it was really good. There was a lot of pressure, but it was like we were all kind of dealing with it together, right? So it wasn't just like one person. It was all of us. And then, we had guys like Wojciechowski as senior leaders, and Trajan, who was a 4-year guy, as a redshirt. And so we had all these guys kind of guide us and help us through this transition from being like, a high school stud to trying to make it at Duke basketball. These days, right, it's just like, in recruiting, not for us, but for, Duke, it's just like you're the one and done rules kind of changed everything, right? It's just like you've got to get these great players because look what they're doing, right? Look at the Marvin Bagley, Julio Okafor, Justice Winslow. Look what they're doing. Like, they're just dominating right away. So you kind of you go after them because they're going to really help you win and hope you'll help your program. Because if you don't get them, somebody's going to get them, right? Somebody's going to get them, like Coach Calipari at Kentucky. So I think it's changed things now because you only have them really for 1 year. And you're doing it over and over again, right? Every year you're doing the same thing. So I don't know too much about it because we're not really recruiting that way. We take a lot of JUCO transfers and D1 transfers, but it's different from when I was coming out 20 years ago. It's just different.
So you mentioned coaching, and you've been coaching for a couple of years, and we want to know what's the most surprising part about being on the other end of the bench from being a player, and is there something that you did as a player that you now look back and now that you're a coach say, oh, I have to give all the coaches respect for something that players do now that you're just like, oh, when I was a player I did that same thing.
I think as coaches we have a short-term memory. We think like we'll get upset at our players and we'll get frustrated with them, and it's just like, wait a minute. These guys aren't perfect, right? You made mistakes as a player. Stop getting so mad at them. Coach them, teach them, show them, right? And as a coach, you feel like you have no control during the game, even though you're making adjustments and you're making substituting and you're calling plays. You just feel like you can't control whether I get that rebound, whether I don't give up middle, whether I make these free throws, right? You just don't have that control. But it's fun, and this is one of the many things I learned from Coach K was his assistants were all former guys, former players at Duke, and they coached by experience. I remember Quinn just coaching so much, using his experience when he was a player. He just had so much energy, so much juice as an assistant. That's the one thing I've tried to capture in my young coaching career as an assistant is to like lead these guys or talk to these guys with my own experience, because I've been that guy, right? I've been the starter, I've been the guy off the bench, I've been the guy who didn't play, and so I try to take something in my long basketball career overseas and in college to try to give it to my player any way they can and whenever they need it, and that's kind of something I'm trying to really do as I learn this coaching business. But yeah, we get frustrated with our guys, or we get fired up for our guys. You really miss the game. You miss being on that court for sure. The coach, so I love being around the guys. But I think the biggest thing is like I got to take a step back, check myself a little bit, and be like, hey, these kids are gonna make mistakes just like you did. These kids are gonna miss shots just like you did. These kids are gonna miss a box out just like you did. Get on them, hold them accountable, and next play, let's go.
Hey, Chris, we're going to wrap up here, and we have a tradition. Whenever we interview a former player, we ask them for a story, some secret story, a story that we as the general public wouldn't necessarily know about Coach K. And you are truly unique, sir, because in addition to Coach K, you also played for another incredibly colorful figure in the game in Rick Majerus. Give me your best Coach K story, and then give me your best Rick Majerus story.
Okay. So I've been thinking about this one since, I've been thinking about this one a lot because Majerus was kind of my last 3 years of college basketball anyway, and there were so many that I was like, all right, think of some Coach K stories. I got a great Coach K story where it's really personal for me in terms of, anyway, I think it's really good. I think your listeners will really enjoy it. It's also, anyway, so we lost to Michigan. My freshman year, the 97-98 season. I think we were number 1 or number 2 in the country. We lose a tractor trailer, on that team.
Oh yeah, he had a huge. We were up by 10 with like 2 or 3 minutes remaining. Yeah, and they scored like the final 15 points of the game. Yeah, I remember the game well. Yeah,
and they just beat us. And it's our first loss, and first time we've ever lost as these freshmen, right? And we're like, how is Coach K going to handle it? So Coach K, before practice, every practice, traditionally all the guys would kind of sit on that opposing bench right there, and he would talk to and direct everyone, whether it was film, whether it was a little message, whatever it was. And so he's talking to us in his typical Coach K fashion about some of you guys need to stop thinking this is high school. I don't play favorites. I don't need, people. Your parents, and this is in high school where parents are calling me or this or sending me emails or sending me faxes. Like, that's not how this works. We win together, we play together. And he just starts ripping us. Not as an individual, right? He's ripping the team. And we're all kind of nodding our head listening. It's like, who did this? What happened? Like, what's going on? So we take a good lashing as a team collectively, right? Because that's what Coach K is all about, collective effort. And so we're taking a lashing collectively. And it's our first real lashing because we've been playing well so well, we won all the game. So I give my dad a call after the game, and he's like, hey, how was coaching practice? And I'm talking to my dad. I'm like, yeah, he just ripped it. Well, I guess one of the parents, like, either emailed or, called coach or did something, being like, my son needs to do this, my son needs to do that. And he's like, man, I hate to tell you this, but that was your mom. And so I'm like, what? And so what happened was my mom, I guess, after the game, like, faxed Coach K the office being like, sorry for the loss. I think Chris and Elton should play more together. And I was like, Dad, are you kidding me? So that was me that got the lashing. So I think that nobody knows that story, and like not even my teammates. But I've told that one. And if you guys know my mom, and she means well, and bless her heart, she's just one of those soccer moms, right? Her son should play. And so that was kind of it's more of a story of my family than Coach.
It's a great story. That's awesome.
That was what I remember the most. So I'm like, that's the story I tell the most to family and friends after I left is just, anyway. So that one to me is pretty funny because I was sitting there just like, man, what idiot parents doing this? And come to it, it's my mom.
Okay, so now Rick Majerus' turn, right?
Yeah, Rick Majerus. Like, this guy's colorful, and a lot of it's not probably appropriate for radio or podcast, but he was the best. He would leave you. He would say such inappropriate things at inappropriate times. But my favorite is this. So he's on a home visit at a recruit's house with Mike Pusey and his mom and his dad and his sister. Mike Pusey is a Salt Lake City kid, and Pusey's this 6'9", 205, 210 pounds, skinny, just hardworking, typical Utah U, right? And his coach Majerus is sitting in their, in the home visit, obviously in sweats and a t-shirt, just worked out, and he's with assistant coach Jeff Judkins, and he's like, Mike, I think you can be a great player for us, but you're skinny, and if the only way you're going to be able to play in my system is if you gain weight, put on weight so that you don't get pushed around. And he's like, and I know you can do it because I look at your mom and your sister, and they're both heavy sets, and you have the ability to do it.
Oh my God! Did he really? That's so funny.
Yeah, and Mike signs.
Oh, that's
my favorite
great.
one. Another quick one would be, your coach was always big on Majerus was always big on having individual meetings while he's showering. So you're waiting for it. As you transfer, you heard about all the rumors, and I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I got the call. It's like, hey, coach wants to see you in the shower, and so you just stand there, and he's having a full conversation while he's shampooing and he's toweling himself up, and you're just like not listening, right? You're just focused on not looking down. You have no idea what he's saying because you're so scared in there. Like, what is going on? It's completely inappropriate these days, right? But back then, that was like you were gonna get it. You just didn't know when. He got me. It was I didn't know what he said, but he got me.
That's really funny. Chris, I can't thank you enough for doing this with us. You were a fabulous. You were such a good interview. This was a ton of fun. Great insight, both from a guy who clearly knows his basketball and from someone who's experienced the basketball world as a player and a coach. Yeah. We really appreciate you doing it. Utah Valley is my new favorite team out there on the West Coast because of you.
We appreciate it.
Good luck, man. We hope it really goes well. And again, thank you so much for joining us on the Duke Basketball Report podcast.
Dad, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate everything. I really do.
Take care, Chris. Thank you.
Yep. We'll see you.
Wow. First of all, thank you so much, Chris Burgess, for coming on the podcast and giving us such what I think is one of the most insightful, informative, and engaging interviews that we've had on this podcast. It was incredibly awesome. And I will note for those of you out there that, to my knowledge, none of us are doing this podcast while in the shower. So we have that going for us. But I want to start with Sam. Sam wasn't able to join us today. Sam, give us your takeaways from this interview. What did you think?
Well, first of all, I really feel like we missed out on the Baron Davis going to Duke experience.
I know.
You thought,
yeah.
You thought the 99 team.
I'm sorry, Jay. I'm sorry, Sam. During the interview, we're chatting back and forth, trying to like organize the questions because this was kind of a short notice interview. And when he mentioned that, I was like, Jason, Baron Davis could have been in this class. This is ridiculous.
Yeah,
It would have been 3 B's, an A, and a D.
They would have won 9 national championships in 2 years.
Yeah, they would have.
Yeah. So that's my first take on that. The second thing, the part that was most informative was the way that he talked about all the current Duke players and just kind of the whole environment around college basketball. It's neat that he's so plugged into it when he's at a school that, he even admits, he's like, we're not going after top 20 kids. They're going after transfers. They're going after guys who are out west and maybe want to be in Utah. So he's not really, operating under the same recruiting rules that a Coach K or a John Calipari is operating under. But he's really aware of it, and he knows a lot about all these kids. He knows about all their games, and it just seems like he's like so clued into everything, and it's really refreshing. And we know that all these coaches know a lot about the game and about the kids, but to hear him articulate it, I think is really impressive. I didn't admittedly know much about Chris Burgess before I had mentioned him on the show. It came up that he was coaching at Utah Valley, but his time at Duke is a little bit before I really became a Duke fan. So I don't remember him much, but I enjoyed that. And then finally, of course, the Rick Majerus story, which I think that this is now the second time we've gotten Rick Majerus stories on the podcast, because previously we had Seth Davis, who also, I believe, told us stories that involved Rick Majerus in the shower. So
yes.
I did not know that Rick Majerus in the shower was going to be a recurring meme on this show, even if it only happens occasionally. And then the fact that Rick Majerus has the stones to talk to a recruit and tell him that, well, your mom's fat, so you're gonna probably put on weight, and that's a good sign. And then that he's able to sign the kid.
Your mom and your sister. You got your mom and your sister are both fat. Oh my God.
I mean, coming from a dude like Rick Majerus, it's like, well, he knows a thing or two about this. So that was cool. I was listening to the interview. So you guys did the interview earlier today, and then I got a chance to listen to it just before we came on here, and I'm standing in my kitchen listening to it, and I was howling at the story about the recruit with the mom and the sister. That is nuts. And also, it should be noted, just for our own sake, that is definitely something that would not fly in 2017, but apparently was fine in the mid-90s.
I was going to say, I mean, aside from the fact that I thought Burgess was incredibly personable, engaging, and very revealing, I want to harken back the stuff that he was talking about, from his scouting of Duke. There was one specific thing that jumped out to me, and it's a term that I'm not sure people are going to necessarily understand. He talked about Bagley's second jump, and what that term means is how quickly you get off the floor after taking a shot, or you jump once to take a shot, and then how quickly you get off the floor a second time. And it may seem like something that isn't that important, but people who really know basketball know that the second jump is super important. Like if you attempt to block a shot, the ability to then bounce back and get the rebound if you don't get it, or if you put up a shot, your ability to get that second jump and get the offensive rebound. This is a really, really important trait. And it's not the kind of thing people talk about all that much, but it is something about, I urge you, people, watch Marvin Bagley and notice his second jump, because it is really impressive. It is really fast. It's something that, do you guys, Antoine Jameson was unbelievably quick off the floor. It's one of the reasons Antoine Jameson was one of the best college basketball players of his era, and then had a very, very successful career in the NBA. And Marvin Bagley appears to have some of that. And when Burgess talked about that, I was like, damn, this guy, this is some in-depth stuff that we're getting. And then the last thing I want to mention is Burgess is just an assistant coach, but the guy who's the head coach there at Utah Valley is Mark Pope, who won a national title at Kentucky, played in the NBA for a while. And Utah Valley was not a program that was on the map at all. And it it really feels like Mark Pope has them going in the right direction. I think he's a guy who his star is going to be on the rise as a head coach, and I don't know how long he'll be at Utah Valley. I think he could easily move on to another top job, and I'm hoping he takes Chris Burgess with him, because I think Chris Burgess, just judging from that interview, I think he also has a bright future as a coach. He's clearly a really smart guy, and I feel incredibly lucky to have had him on the show, and he was great. He was just a lot of fun.
I think the one thing, in addition to what you guys mentioned, that I noted was, first of all, he kind of gave us an insight into how a mid-major like schedules games and what they're trying to get out of these games, and quote unquote, getting whooped by some of the blue blood programs. They basically battled Kentucky to, very well for most of the game until Kentucky pulled away, and then was very, very sound, strong against Duke in the first half.
For 8 minutes. For 8 minutes. That was hysterical. That was so funny. He goes, we were right there with Kentucky for 30 minutes, and we were right there with Duke for 8.
Yeah. But when you're scheduling these games, people are like, why are these guys scheduling against Duke, against Kentucky, against UNC to just get their butts whooped? And most people are thinking, oh, it's about the payday, because a lot of the times, these blue blood programs will pay these mid-major, lower major teams to come and quote unquote get whooped. But when he talked about how they played against Idaho State, or was Idaho State, I want to say it was, and he said that at that point, the players were like, this is child's play. This is easy because we're playing Idaho State.
And they whooped them by like 20. Yeah.
Yeah. And he's like, that is what they're preparing for. Like, you take a couple lickings so that you know how to play at a level above everyone else in your conference. And I think it seems to him that those kind of games are going to help his team down the road. And that's why they kind of schedule these games. And obviously there was the link between Mark Pope and Kentucky, Chris Burgess and Duke, and it made a lot of sense to schedule it on their end. The other thing that I will mention that of note was when we were asking him the question about the 99 team and about how close they were to winning, you could tell that he wants to replay that game right now. He wants to get on a uniform, get the guys back together, and replay that game, because I feel like in his mind, I'm pretty sure in all of our minds, you play that game 99 times out of 100, the 99 team is winning that national championship. And you could tell that it still kind of eats at him a little bit.
I can't believe he's never seen it. He's never watched it again. It's unbelievable.
I believe it, because in my opinion, in my mind, the 2004 Final Four never happened. And I was there, and I've never seen a replay of that game, and I never want to see a replay. So I kind of, when he said that, it got me itching again, because I was like, yes, there's definitely, everyone has a game that they say, if you tell me right now, lace them up and replay that game, and we'll smoke you like that. And I'm pretty sure in his mind, you replay the 99 championship game right now with all the guys, 99 Duke team is whooping that ass.
It's interesting. So in that game, in that 1999 game, Burgess only played 7 minutes. And the only stat he had, he picked up 1 foul. I mean, that he was 1 foul away from having a 7 trillion. And yet it still eats at him, even though he, his role on that team sort of had whittled away by the end of the season, with the success of Brand and Battier as our big men. It still eats at him because he knows how great that team was. And I talk about it all the time. I think that 99 team is alongside like Duke 1992 is the greatest Duke teams of all time.
Absolutely. And to wrap it up with the interview, we have not talked about the fact that, we learned for the first time that Chris Burgess has a soccer mind like a lot of us, and that his mom ended up being the person who, basically emailed or faxed Coach K, is what he said, and said that he should give Chris and Elton Brand more playing time, which I thought was kind of funny. And I think it's funny that he laughs at that story, even now, where he just kind of like, it was just a mom being a mom. And Coach K is chastising the team as a team and not giving anything away. And Chris Burgess is like, yeah, who would do such a thing? And it ended up being his mom. I thought that was pretty funny.
I think all of us have had a horrifying experience like that with our parents at some point in our life.
Now, my parents stayed out of all my affairs when I was a kid. They let me figure all that stuff out for themselves until the school principal would have to call home for something. But that only happened a couple times.
Are we about to get a Sam is a bad boy story?
Yeah, we'll save them for another time. There's a few of them.
And now we're going to go to parting shots, and I will start with Jason.
So I've got kind of a weird parting shot. It has nothing to do with sports whatsoever, but folks who go to the DBR, to the off-topic board, I'm sure you are aware that I am a semi-professional, amateur, whatever you want to call it, movie reviewer. I get to go to lots of movies. I get to go to screenings before movies are released, and it's great. It's a lot of fun. I see upwards of 100 movies a year, and I sit with a bunch of critic friends of mine, and so we all talk about the movies, and I get a real critic kind of perspective on them. So for the first time, I'm coming on here to recommend a movie to everyone, and that movie is Coco, the new Pixar film, which I saw just a couple days ago. And if you have a child between the age of maybe 5 or 6 and 12 or 13, you must take them to see this movie. And if you don't have a child within those ages, I think you should see it anyway. It is an incredibly beautiful story about the value of family, the value of our ancestors, connecting with our family and with our ancestors and our personal history. It's one of Pixar's best films. It's not Toy Story or WALL-E or Monsters Inc. or The Incredibles. Those are the pantheon for me. Those are the truly greats, but it's just beneath those. It's right up there, I think, with Up and Inside Out, and it's a gorgeous, beautiful film. I don't usually talk about movies here on the podcast, but I'm talking about it now because I really think people should go see this movie. They may look at it and think it's very ethnic, and they think, oh, maybe it's not for me. I'm telling you, it's an amazing, amazing film, and a gorgeous, beautiful, beautiful film.
I need to just get all my movie suggestions from you, Jason, because the last movie I saw in the theater was Zoolander 2.
That's a mistake. That is a mistake.
I mean, it wasn't a mistake until we watched it. Now hindsight is 2020. Yeah, it was a mistake. I'll just go see the movies that you recommend for me from now on.
Good call.
All right. Sam, your parting shot.
So I'm not much of a movie goer either, although I have been very reliable about seeing the new Star Wars movies as they've come out. Otherwise, pretty much never go. Anyway, a couple things for parting shots here. The first, on kind of a sad note, I don't think we talked about this the other day, that Jeff Capel's father, Jeff Capel Jr., died over the weekend. We know that he had been battling, I think it was ALS, and so that's just it's really sad news. We had read about, I know there was a great article that Jeff Capel, our Jeff Capel, had written in the Players Tribune about his father some time ago. So that is the first note. The second, I noticed that Chris Collins's Northwestern team was losing tonight to Creighton, and they were at home in Evanston. So that's a bummer. They ended up losing that game. Hopefully they bounce back from that. I imagine that'll be the end of their time, at least for the moment, in the top 25. So sorry to Coach Collins, former podcast guest, Coach Collins, for that. The most important parting shot that I had for this week was to tell you guys about my experience getting out of Chicago this morning. So I went to the game last night with a couple of friends, and we were out having some drinks after the game. I went to a buddy's place to crash for a few hours before my very early flight this morning, and I failed to set my alarm. So I woke up with a bunch of frantic calls and voicemails from the friends I had gone to the game with, being like, yo, where are you? Like, we're getting on the plane now, we're taking off. Like, okay, hope you make it back. So I rushed over to Midway Airport and was all frantic. I'm I didn't get much sleep and yada, yada, yada. So anyway, my parting shot is specifically a shout out to Mary at the Southwest counter at Midway Airport, who got me on another flight. And I'm not entirely clear what all the airline policies are for rebooking for stupid people who miss their flights, but Mary hooked it up for me. So shout out to Mary. She is the official ticket agent of the Duke Basketball Report podcast.
I'll need that next time I get stuck in Chicago, which seems
That's
to
right.
be often.
Just go find Mary.
Yeah, I will do that. My parting shot is, as we said, we're coming to you on Wednesday, November 15th now, Thursday, November 16th for Jason and I. And I just got back from a viewing of Mean Girls, the musical. And you're saying, wow, Mean Girls has a musical? They do. It just debuted last week here in DC. It's going on Broadway next year, but they decided to start in DC in kind of a plot twist. And it is absolutely hilarious. I love the movie. I'm one of those guys who have watched the movie probably 100 times. And when the musical came out, me and 3 other friends decided we are getting tickets and going to see this musical. And that was an incredibly great use of $56.50 because this musical is absolutely hilarious. If you are a fan of the movie and you are in DC, I would check it out as in DC, I believe for 3 more weeks. And then next year it will be hitting Broadway, and it's written by Tina Fey. So it has most of the plot that you are expecting and a lot of good laughs. So shout out to Mean Girls the musical, and hopefully you guys can check it out if it comes to a city near you. For those of you who are expecting a recap or at least a preview of sorts of the PK80 Invitational, that is coming up next week. As you guys know, that's Thanksgiving week, and we are going to, there's a lot of teams that we could play. There's 16 teams in this Invitational. We thought it'd be best not to preview all of the teams that we may face, because we could face as many as 7 different teams in this bracket. But there are some great teams that are going to be in this Invitational. We have Texas, we have Gonzaga, we have, and we're going to be there. We're starting out against Portland State in Portland. So check us out next week.
Hey, by the way, Florida is the best one.
Florida is in this.
Yeah,
there's
Florida's
so many
a team
teams in this. I don't even know half of them. And yeah. Oregon, I know Oregon's on the other side. UNC's on the other side. It really is an incredible Invitational put together by Phil Knight and Nike. But it should be a fun week of basketball. Next week, we are going to come to you after Thanksgiving. We are going to take some time to spend with our families, and we will recap the entire PK80 Invitational when we get back after Thanksgiving. But for now, that's going to do it for episode 94 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Remember, if you love this podcast, or even if you like us, please rate us on iTunes and leave a review. If you have constructive criticism for us, and we get a lot of it all the time, and we are very receptive to it, please email us at dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Also, hit us up if you are interested in sponsoring the podcast. You can hit us up at that same email address, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Remember to check out the DBR forums at dukebasketballreport.com. But for now, for Sam, for Jason, I am Donald. Thank you so much. Enjoy your Thanksgivings, everybody. And Duke Band, take us home.